Hello, guys. Today I told you the secret history of the Manhattan Project, so let's begin. On a cold December morning in 1938, a German chemist named Lise Meitner sat on a log in the snowy Swedish woods with her nephew Otto Frisch and did a calculation on a scrap of paper that would change the world forever. She had just received a letter from her old colleague Otto Hahn in Berlin. He had bombarded uranium atoms with neutrons and gotten barium, an element roughly half the size of uranium. The physics made no sense, or did it? Meitner scratched numbers in the snow. If a uranium nucleus split in two, the energy released, according to Einstein's famous equation, would be approximately 200 million electron volts per atom. The energy locked inside a single pound of uranium, if fully released, could level a city. She was right. What followed was the most audacious, most expensive, most secretive, and most morally fraught scientific undertaking in human history. A project so vast it employed 130,000 people across 30 secret cities, cost more than $2 billion, over $28 billion today, and ultimately produced weapons that killed more than 200,000 people in the space of 3 days and cast a shadow over every human life that has been lived since. This is the story of the Manhattan Project, not the sanitized version, the full one, with its heroes and villains, its geniuses and bureaucrats, its moral agonies and breathtaking triumphs, its survivors and its ghosts. It is a story about what happens when the most brilliant minds in the world are handed an unlimited budget, told the fate of civilization depends on them, and asked to do the impossible. They did it, and we are still living with what they made.
Chapter 1. The Letter That Started Everything. Einstein, Roosevelt, and the Warning Nobody Wanted to Hear. In the summer of 1939, the world was careening toward catastrophe. Adolf Hitler had already absorbed Austria and Czechoslovakia without firing a shot. Poland was next. The democracies of Europe were either unprepared or unwilling to stop him. And in the world's physics laboratories, something was happening that almost nobody, in government at least, understood. The physicists understood, and they were terrified. The discovery of nuclear fission in December 1938 had sent shockwaves through the international scientific community. Hahn and Strassmann's experiment, interpreted correctly by Meitner and Frisch, had demonstrated something almost miraculous, that uranium atoms, when struck by neutrons, could split, releasing enormous amounts of energy and, crucially, releasing additional neutrons that could split other uranium atoms, a chain reaction. In theory, an explosion of unimaginable power. The question was no longer whether such a bomb was possible. The question was who would build it first. Leo Szilard was among the first to grasp the full military implications. Born in Budapest in 1918, Szilard was one of those rare individuals whose intellect operated several steps ahead of conventional thinking. He had conceived of the idea of a nuclear chain reaction as early as 1933, while standing at a London traffic light of all places, and had even patented the concept before the discovery of fission made it physically real. Now, in 1939, Szilard was in a panic. He knew that Germany had stopped all exports of uranium ore from Czechoslovakia, which it now controlled. He knew that many of the world's best nuclear physicists were German. He knew that the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin was doing nuclear research, and he knew that if Germany built an atomic bomb before the Allies did, the consequences were too terrible to contemplate. But who would listen to him?
Szilard had an idea. He would get Einstein to sign a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt. The choice of Einstein was not merely symbolic. Einstein was the most famous scientist in the world, a cultural icon whose name was synonymous with genius itself. More importantly, Einstein had personal connections to the Belgian royal family, and Belgium controlled the Congo, which held the world's richest deposits of uranium ore. Szilard needed to ensure that uranium didn't fall into German hands. On July 12, 1939, Szilard and his colleague Edward Teller drove to Peconic, Long Island, where Einstein was renting a house for the summer. They found him sailing on a small lake and persuaded him to hear them out. Einstein had not been following the fission research closely. When Szilard explained the chain reaction concept, Einstein reportedly said, "Daran habe ich gar nicht gedacht." I hadn't thought of that at all. It took about 2 hours to draft the letter, refine it in both German and English, and get Einstein's signature. The letter went through several drafts over the following weeks, growing longer and more detailed. By the time it was ready to be delivered, it had become one of the most consequential documents in American history. The letter, dated August 2, 1939, began, "Some recent work by E. Fermi and L. Szilard, which has been communicated to me in manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. Certain aspects of the situation which has arisen seem to call for watchfulness and, if necessary, quick action on the part of the administration." Einstein went on to explain in careful but alarming terms the possibility of chain reactions, the potential for extremely powerful bombs of a new type, and the danger that Germany might be pursuing such weapons. He urged Roosevelt to establish contact with the physics community and to secure America's supply of uranium. Delivering the letter proved harder than writing it. Szilard's original plan to use a Belgian diplomat fell through. His choice as a personal courier to Roosevelt, a Wall Street economist named Alexander Sachs, was a man who knew the president personally, but who took 2 months to arrange a meeting.
By the time Sachs finally sat down with Roosevelt on October 11, 1939, Germany had already invaded Poland. World War II had begun. Sachs read the letter aloud, then told Roosevelt a story about Napoleon's dismissal of Robert Fulton's steamboat, an example of a military leader failing to see the potential of new technology and paying the price. The analogy was pointed. Roosevelt turned to his aide, Brigadier General Paul Watson, and said, "Pa, this requires action." It was a beginning, but it was not the beginning of the Manhattan Project. Not yet. What followed were 2 more years of fitful progress, inadequate funding, bureaucratic confusion, and half measures. The United States government, for all its eventual decisiveness, moved with remarkable slowness toward the bomb. The reason was partly organizational. No one knew quite who should be in charge of such a strange project, which crossed the boundaries between science, the military, and industry. But it was also partly psychological. The bomb was so unprecedented, so difficult to visualize, that even the men who believed in it struggled to convey its reality to administrators and politicians who had never thought about nuclear physics in their lives. In November 1939, Roosevelt authorized the formation of the Uranium Committee, chaired by Lyman Briggs of the National Bureau of Standards. The committee was given $6,000 for initial research, a sum that now seems almost comically inadequate, equivalent to perhaps $120,000 today. Progress was slow. The Uranium Committee met infrequently, communicated poorly, and lacked both the scientific talent and the institutional muscle to pursue the bomb with any urgency.
The physicists who knew most about fission, many of them European refugees who had fled fascism and had the most personal stake in stopping Hitler, found themselves excluded from the committee's deliberations because they weren't American citizens. The irony was profound. The men who best understood both the technical challenge and the moral urgency of building an atomic bomb were considered security risks by the country they were trying to save. Meanwhile, in Britain, things were moving faster. In March 1940, Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peierls, both German-born physicists working in Birmingham, produced a remarkable 3-page document now known as the Frisch-Peierls Memorandum. In it, they calculated the critical mass of pure uranium-235 needed to sustain a chain reaction, roughly 1 pound, far less than previous estimates. They also estimated the explosive power of such a bomb, equivalent to thousands of tons of dynamite, and described its likely effects, including lethal radiation. The memorandum's final paragraph was chilling. It is important to realize that these considerations show that the bomb could be made by a relatively small amount of material, and that the technical difficulties are not insuperable. The British government took the memorandum seriously. A secret committee, codenamed MAUD, was formed to study the feasibility of an atomic bomb. By July 1941, the MAUD committee had concluded that a bomb could indeed be built, that it would require about 25 pounds of enriched uranium-235, and that it could potentially be ready by 1943. The committee recommended an immediate all-out effort. The MAUD report was shared with American scientists and eventually reached James Conant, the president of Harvard University, who was then serving as Roosevelt's scientific advisor. Conant was galvanized. He pushed for a full-scale American program. On October 9, 1941, 2 months before Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt met with Vannevar Bush, the director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, and gave the green light for an accelerated atomic bomb program. The decision was made in secret, known to only a handful of people. 2 months later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and America was at war. The bomb was no longer a theoretical possibility to be studied at leisure. It was a wartime necessity to be achieved at any cost. The Manhattan Project was about to begin in earnest. But first, a group of scientists at the University of Chicago needed to prove that a nuclear chain reaction was actually possible. On December 2, 1942, in a squash court beneath the stands of Stagg Field at University of Chicago, a team led by the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi achieved the world's first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. The device they built, a pile of uranium and graphite blocks and uranium oxide pseudospheres, was called Chicago Pile 1. It was the world's first nuclear reactor. When the reaction was sustained for 28 minutes and then safely shut down, Fermi's colleague Arthur Compton made a carefully worded phone call to James Conant in Washington. The Italian navigator has just landed in the New World. How were the natives? Very friendly. The atomic age had officially begun.